And good evening, folks. You're listening to Arcane Radio. I'm Sean the Fork Chop Forker, joined tonight by Lon Strickler, the everyman over at Phantoms and Monsters, and our good friend Butch Witkowski, who's out there chasing the Pennsylvania lichen. And tonight, guys, we're back after missing a week. We apologize for that. But we'll be joined by Nick Redfern later on in the show. Guys, good to be here with you this week, and just nice to be with you.
As always.
Yeah, calling from the wild and woolly Pennsylvania. I'm telling you.
It's been something. The weather here, of course, lives up to its Pennsylvania reputation.
It absolutely did.
We woke up this morning, and again, as I tend to be known to say from time to time, if you see a pair of testicles floating around out there somewhere, bring them back. It was so cold this morning.
Boy, it was.
My God. Like, I went to bed last night, and it was pretty nice. Got up this morning, and wow. It's like waking up in a meat locker.
Yeah, if you can cover your garden up last night, you're screwed.
It was 30. It was 30 here this morning.
Yeah, it was around 20. I checked 29. Because I woke up, I thought somebody left the window open. I thought, Christ, I couldn't believe how damn cold it was.
Yeah,
but
I think my car said 29 degrees this morning myself. It was pretty chilly.
Yeah.
But, and of course, last week we had some really bad storms come up this way. A lot of wind and rain that tore through Pennsylvania. And, of course, some of the areas Butch and I were just at the week before flooded out. Part of the road gone. One of the bridges gone. So it was a rough weekend for people in Pennsylvania. So, guys, I'm just glad we could all be together tonight, all of us safe and sound, as we get in to talk about some very strange things going on in our world.
Yeah, Nick's coming on tonight. He actually has two books out. He had The Woman in Black, which he put out a couple months ago. Then he's got another book called The Monster Book, which is pretty wild. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there I never heard about, but I think we're going to be talking mostly about the Women in Black. It put some pretty wild things in that book. A lot of stuff I didn't know about.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. We've gotten so many books, Lon, the last few weeks.
Yeah, I know.
It's unreal. Of course, I'm reading Ryan Sprague's Somewhere in the Skies, which is really good. If you folks get a chance to pick that up, it's real well worth the read. It's my speed. I really enjoy it. Some great stories in there. He does it a lot of justice, and it just starts off well. It's got a good hook to it, and I think the listeners will like it. We have Ryan coming on. Of course, he's the co-host of Into the Fray, our good friend Shannon LeGros and those folks, Sam Sheeran, wonderful people over there. It's a good book, and I hope you all go and buy it. Somewhereintheskies.com. Check it out. And, of course, this morning I got a message from my buddy Seth Breedlove. I got a screener of Boggy Creek Monster, and I'm telling you guys this. It looks beautiful. It sounds great. I would like Lyle Blackburn to narrate my dreams, if that's possible. Like it's.
He did the narration.
He did the narration. It's superbly done. It looks good. It feels great, and it's. I wish it was longer, but it just takes you in.
Well, I hope I can get a copy of that. What's that?
We'll see. We can arrange for you.
We just booked Lyle for in January. He's got it's actually a handbook, but it's in magazine form, and Rue Morgue, the magazine's putting it out. It's Monstro Bizarro, and it's got Lyle stories with Nick Redfern and David Weatherly and others. I think Linda's in there as well. I ordered my copy, but if you get it, you got to get it through Rue Morgue magazine. So. Lyle told me it's a limited edition, but it looks like it's going to be pretty neat. So, but Lyle will be joining us as well after the beginning of the year. January, we're starting to line a lot of people up.
Yep, we'll be back after a small break in the holidays, which we're still kind of talking about here.
Yeah.
Programming note is that a lot of our back archive shows are saving to our Spreaker page. I'm going to have to get that all situated when we get them uploaded to our Podbean. And for those folks that listen on Stitcher or iTunes, get them out to you guys in a timely fashion. ETA, I'd like to have them out by the end of day Friday, so bear with me as I work through that backlog. Also, Saturday, I'm recording a podcast with a couple friends of mine, Dave Groves, Maz Adams, not Matt Adams, Maz Adams, the Nocturnal Journal, which is going to be an irregular podcast. We're just getting together and talk about Bigfoot. So we'll see how I can foster those guys along and get them headed off in the right direction. The Nocturnal Journal coming to a podcatcher near you. What do you got, Lon?
Well, last Thursday I did a show with Tim Beckley and Tim Swartz. Kind of returned the favor with him coming on our show, and that was pretty wild. We were talking about these creepy clowns and cryptids, and it turned out to be a pretty interesting show.
Yeah, I heard it.
A lot of weird. You can attest to it. There was some weird stuff in that show.
You got that right.
So I if you get a chance, it's on KCOR radio out of Las Vegas. I'm pretty sure you just put it in the Google and get the link, and it's in their archives. But and it's also on YouTube. Matter of fact, I listened to it the other day. It's pretty wild. So yeah, I've got some pretty good stuff this week. I do want to say thanks to David Weatherly. He put a link up today for the Pennsylvania Dogman Upright Canine map. Give us a little shout out for that. And folks get a chance. I've got the link on the on Facebook, and it's on the website on Fans Monster blog site too. For the map. So, we're keeping a record of all the historical and new sightings of Dogman, Upright Canine, Werewolf, whatever is canid in the state of Pennsylvania and some of the surrounding states within 50 miles of the Pennsylvania line. So, take a look at that. I got some actually upright canine stories to talk about, matter of fact. And this first was a black dog man encounter in northern Indiana. The gentleman by the name of Mickey, who now lives in Kentucky, was talking about an event he had when he was a kid. He said in 1972, we lived in a town in northern Indiana in the Muncie area. It was a real small town. I was 9 years old. My mom came and woke me up at like at 2 o'clock in the morning. She said there was this black creature on our front porch, and it was about the size of an ape. It had a snout like a dog, and it would scream these blood-curdling screams, and then would start this nar, 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 and then it would scream. I don't know if you know anything about coonhounds, but my father always had coonhounds, and he said he was on the third shift, so he wasn't here. He said an old coonhound is not afraid of anything. He said if they were cowering in their box when this thing was up there, they wouldn't even come out. So he said my mother got me up because I was the oldest of 6 kids. We were watching it through the front door. It wasn't making any aggressive moves. It was just making those screams and crazy noises. But she went and got the pistol. And she said, I'm not going to bother unless it tries to come in the house. So after about 2 hours, she finally went and got a Polaroid, and one of the instant Polaroids, and had brought it back and put it up against the window and snapped a picture. Now when the flash went off, this thing shot off the wall over the rail about 8 foot into the front yard. We had the light on, and it landed on all fours and took off. She said it was the fastest thing I've ever seen. Now, I don't know what the hell this was. In fact, I wonder if they even got a picture. And if they did, that would be quite interesting to see, because I don't know if anybody's got a real decent picture of this thing. And it doesn't sound like a dog man. Well, it may be a dog man, because it's on all fours. It probably wasn't an upright canine. Or anything like we've been seeing or getting reports on around here. I don't know what to think of that was. What do you think, Butch?
Well, the screaming But I found one report on the map, in the interactive map, which was up in Sean's area, and then the couple things we had up in Sean's area a week before last, same thing. So I wonder if our friend out there is getting vocal.
I don't know. I don't think we've had any recent reports of any sounds this thing has made as far as, screams and stuff.
No.
Mm-hmm. I don't recall any that you shared with me.
No, I don't think so.
No.
I mean, they do seem aggressive. Now, this thing wasn't even aggressive. But, the ones up here in PA, they seem to show some type of aggression or are territorial. Let's put it that way. Don't want anything coming near it. I don't know. That's an interesting one.
They definitely stand their ground. They don't walk away. They don't run.
No, they don't. My buddy Jamie came up with this story he found on YouTube, and it's pretty weird. I don't know what this thing was, but we got possibly official cover-up on this thing. This happened in 1998. A retired forestry official had a strange encounter in the Apalachicola National Forest. Now, he said it was 1998 when he was 37 years old. He had been working with the Forest Department for 12 years. He said there was a fire in the Apalachicola National Forest that summer. The Bradwell Bay area was on fire when all this happened. And he said the fire was raging pretty bad at that point. We didn't know if we could ever get it out. That morning, I reported to the command center on Helen Guard Station Road to get briefed on what I would be doing that day. So me and another guy were given the task of driving around looking for animals along the road of Bradwell Bay area. Animals would make it to the road and usually fall out if they were injured or had real bad smoke inhalation. Our job was to pick them up and take them to the vets at the command center. The vets would treat them and on some occasions euthanize the ones that wouldn't make it. So we were driving along the area heading south doing about 45 miles an hour. And that was faster than I should have been driving. I was talking to my partner and didn't realize how fast I was going. Now, all of a sudden, we saw a black figure run out of the woods on all fours. It ran right underneath my driver's side tire. I hit the animal with both the front and back tires. I was driving a 95 Dodge Ram 4x4. So I knew at that speed I had killed it. Immediately, we thought it was a bear, so we got out to pick the bear up and put it in the truck. Upon further investigation, we realized what I had hit was not a bear at all. It was a creature that neither one of us had ever seen. It was about 6 foot tall. It had legs, kneecaps, and feet, just like me and you. The arms hung to about the knee. One arm, a matter of fact, was down by its knee. The other one was up over its head. I had run the creature over under its underarm, across the shoulder blade, and under the back of its neck. The creature was covered in hair, about 3 to 5 inches long on the arm, legs, and head. The hair on the back, ribs, and chest was much shorter. The muscle definition on this animal was phenomenal. It looked like a prize fighter or one of those guys you see on UFC. We flipped the animal over. The jaw was broken from where I had hit it with the truck. Now I could see through it. It had a protruding snout, much like that of a baboon, or what you would think a werewolf looks like. It had eyes just like us. The thing looked a lot like a chimpanzee. Now, we quickly radioed into the command center, and they sent 2 FWC officials out to our location. Within about 15 minutes, the FWC officials arrived, and they told us that they had never seen anything like it. So we all picked the animal up and loaded it into the back of the truck. The animal weighed about 300 to 400 pounds, which dead weight is a lot. They told us they would figure out what it was and let us know. So we had been contacted by the command center at that point, and they told us to come on back and make a statement about what we saw. So we showed up at the command center, and immediately we were brought back to a room to where we fill out an incident report. We were about 10 minutes into the incident report when we were asked to stop and wait, and that there would be some people coming to see us. Within 30 to 40 minutes, 2 government officials showed up. They walked us out to the vehicle. They were asking where we ran over the thing. We told them where it was, and so they examined the area. The truck had no damage. There was a black steel bumper on the front. The animal hit the front of that, and the tires took care of the rest. There was really nothing on the truck except for the undercarriage. There was some blood and hair. The officials collected the blood and hair samples and put them away. Next, they asked us if we would get into the vehicle they came in and take them to the location where we had ran them over. So we complied and got into the vehicle and left with the gentleman. It was a rather quiet ride back to the spot. They didn't say much at all except for a couple exchanges with each other. We showed up at the spot and walked them through what happened. Then all of a sudden, one of the guys, I guess the guy in charge, turned and looked at us and said, "Congratulations, fellas, you ran over a bear." I said, "Sir, but this is no bear that we hit." He quickly interrupted me with, "You don't understand. You ran over a bear." He then said that every time I tell anyone about it, I ran over a bear. I was to never speak a word about what we actually hit, that I could face charges. The whole retirement could go away. They said I would lose my job and that they would slander me and make me look like a fool. So I looked at my partner, and we had no other choice but to comply. Now, on the ride back, it kind of struck me as odd that this was an actual government cover-up. They knew what this thing was that we had hit. They had seen them before, and now they were in possession of a body. For some reason, they didn't want anyone to know that they were going to great lengths to keep this under wraps. The main reason I'm telling my story is I'm hoping one of the other 3 people, my partner and the 2 FW officials, will come forward. I figure it's a lot harder to silence 4 people than just one. People need to know that these things are out there and that they're real. Now, I don't know what this was he hit. Apalachicola, the first thing I thought was, well, maybe it was a skunk ape.
Could be. That's the area.
Yeah. But Apalachicola is up on that's up in the Panhandle area, isn't it? Near Tallahassee? I think it is. So that's northern Florida. So I don't know. I don't know. It does sound, talking about the snout and everything, it does sound like, and he mentioned werewolf. It sounds like the descriptions of these weirds or werewolf canids that we hear about every once in a while. I don't know. It's interesting that the government guys came out on this. I haven't heard of any government people as far as Dogman or anything other than possibly a Bigfoot, as far as doing a cover-up. Now, this was 98. So, I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting story.
Well, it happens in an area in the, that panhandle-esque kind of area into Georgia where there's a lot of sightings in that particular region of creatures that kind of fit that description, So perhaps I don't know what he hit, but
I looked at the Apalachicola, the area shots and stuff. I mean, it is a swampy area too. I mean, there's a lot of swamp in there. So, I mean, it's ripe for either one of the creatures. It would be a canid or a swamp ape or I mean, even skunk ape or even a Bigfoot. I don't know. I really don't know, but I'm telling you, that's a strange story. The description, I mean, it was a great description. I just wish he had a picture of it. I mean, or something. But
It didn't stick around or anything. Like it just kind of he hit it.
yeah, I mean, he must have. I mean, he must. You mean as far as killing it?
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently he hit it pretty good. Got up underneath the wheel. Well, anything, even a person getting hit like that would,
Well, I hit a deer once. Well, it hit me technically.
Yeah.
Kamikaze me.
Yeah.
It hit my rear view. It hit my driver's mirror. Hit my quarter panel. Went under my tire, and it got back up.
Oh yeah.
In the road. So
yeah.
I mean, it was quite. These things can take a pounding.
Yeah, they really can. I had a deer doe that actually this was in Baltimore City. He came across the road, and he landed up on my hood into my windshield. Didn't crack it, but I mean he had hair all over the place. He put a hell of a dent in my quarter panel. Just bounced off and kept on running. It's interesting. My daughter hit one the other night, and same thing, $2,000 worth of damage on the front of the car, and the doe just bounced off and ran away.
Yeah, I did $2,200 worth of damage to my van.
Yeah,
so those things can take a pounding. I mean, if this is much more, robust of a creature, what he thinks and how he thinks might have hit it might not actually have done much to it besides either injure it or,
Well, it was a 4x4, so it had a high wheelbase on it, so it probably got underneath and just, I mean, he hit it with two tires. He must have really crushed something. I don't know what it...
I mean, now, it didn't go anywhere after that, or did he not stop? Or...
Yeah, it did. Yeah, he must have hit it right.
Makes you wonder why he didn't take any pictures of it or anything.
I don't know.
I mean, damn, if I hit something like that, I mean, I know, probably didn't have that kind of equipment.
Yeah, I didn't have a camera then. Yeah.
Did he call anybody?
Well, he called the FWC, which is Florida Wildlife. They came out, and they didn't know what the hell it was. Then all of a sudden, now the feds coming out there. I mean, who alarmed the feds about it?
I lost some of it when you cut in and out a little bit. That's why.
Was I cutting in and out?
Just a little bit. No, that's all right. It's, technology.
I don't wonder why I was cutting out.
It's because you're telling the story and the feds don't want it out there.
It happens like that.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But, I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, you'd wonder why he just wouldn't call the highway patrol.
Well, I was out in the middle, out in the boonies. So, I mean, he had, since he wasn't a forest ranger, he had to call Florida Wildlife. That's probably what they do, something like that. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know how they do it down there. In Pennsylvania, I think it's pretty well the same thing. I think Pennsylvania Game Commission gets first crack at anything like that.
Yeah. I don't know. When I was in Ohio, I called the Ohio Highway Patrol, and they sent an officer out, and he executed the deer along the side of the road.
Yeah.
It's funny. He was this big guy, and he was really menacing looking. The deer gets up in the middle of the road. He walks it to the side of the road, points at me and Ray, and then pulls his gun out and shoots the deer, holsters his gun, and he walks towards us. He's this real big guy, and he's like, "You guys okay?" He had this really high... I took everything I could to not laugh at him, but big guy and this really high-pitched voice. But, I don't know. I just ask these questions because...
Yeah. I mean, it's a strange story.
Yeah, I mean, you don't get emotionally invested in this stuff. I mean, you get the stories and you take from them what you can. But, that being said, sometimes with these stories you just don't know. As much as I'd like to believe that this is what happened, why don't we ever get any proof from this kind of stuff, guys? Like, what's the holdup?
That's it.
Well, I'll tell you this. Runs in front of my truck and I hit it, guaranteed it'll be in the truck.
Yeah. You're going to throw the damn thing in the van.
Yeah.
Right.
Gonna have a whole Harry and the Hendersons thing going on there.
Yes, sir.
Butch is going down the street with a Bigfoot strapped to the top of his car.
Speaking of lichens and dogmen, real quick before we bring Nick on, I had I posted a story from our friend JC and his group up in northern Minnesota. They've been up there investigating the lichen, like what they call lichen land, and I'm not going to go into everything right now, but it's posted on the website, on the blog. So the story is 41 hours in lichen land. So if you get a chance, go look at that.
Where's this at now?
It's on the blog.
On the blog, okay. I'll have to take a look. Phantomsandmonsters.com.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. They had some hairy moments. In fact, there's a video. I got a link to the video. They had a confrontation. It's hard to see whatever this was they did confront, but it seems to have been a Bigfoot. The story is this large piece of land in northern Minnesota is owned by a gentleman by the name of Ron Shaw, and it seems that they've got some battles between Bigfoot and lichen in this area. They're kind of a dispute of the areas. It's they got both beasts on the same land, so it's pretty interesting. And of course, JC comes up with some pretty interesting stuff.
What were you saying, Butch?
Small territorial dispute.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna have to check it out on the blog. I want to get up to date on this story. But in a few moments, we're going to have Nick Redfern on the program. And, of course, folks, most of you know who Nick Redfern is. If you don't, we got a quick little bio here. This week, we welcome UFO and cryptid investigator, author Nick Redfern to Arcane Radio. Nick is a full-time author and journalist specializing in a wide range of unsolved mysteries, including Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, UFO sightings, government conspiracies, alien abductions, and paranormal phenomena. Redfern travels and lectures extensively around the world. He has appeared on numerous television shows, including the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, Monster Quest, UFO Hunters, National Geographic's The Truth About UFOs, Paranatural, and Sci-Fi Channel's Proof Positive. Nick's recent books include Women in Black and The Monster Book, and he'll be joining us here in just a few moments. So stay tuned, as we'll be right back with our friend, your friend, Nick Redfern. Welcome back, folks. Arcane Radio, Sean Forker, Lon Strickler, and Butch Witkowski. And we're joined live by Mr. Nick Redfern. And we read your bio before we came back on the air there, Nick. And welcome back to the program, and we're good to have you with us. It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. So, the last time you were on here, you wrote a new book, and that's out, Women in Black. And how did Women in Black come about?
Every now and again, every, 15, 20 cases of a Men in Black report, I would get one where somebody would say something along the lines of, well, one of the cases you talked about in the book was very similar to mine, but instead of involving a man, it involved a woman in black. And so, to start with, I didn't think too much of it. But then over time, I got more and more of these reports come through, and I realized it was sort of like a very much sort of underappreciated aspect of the Men in Black mystery, like a side project of it almost. And so over time, I collected more and more to the point where this year I was able to sort of write a full-length book on all the different reports. So it's very much due to, people coming forward and sharing their stories because they'd read the earlier Men in Black books.
Interesting. We're Lonnie, still with me?
Yeah, here.
All right. Just checking. I hate when that happens.
Yeah, I read the book you sent Nick, and I'm telling you, that was very interesting. There's a lot of stuff that I never even heard about. But I thought one of the most interesting things in the book, and it's one of the earlier parts of the book, was where you had actually mentioned about the Bender family in Bridgeport, who was related to Albert Bender, who was actually the first person to see the MIB and report about it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, Bender was an interesting character because there's also this little-known women in black aspect attached to his story. Now, he lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and of all places possible, he lived in this spooky old house, and his bedroom, or his entire room, was the attic. And Bender was very much into sci-fi and horror, but he was also someone who was very knowledgeable in the field of the occult and the paranormal, and he wasn't like a dabbler. He sort of knew his history in the world of the occult and things like this. And he converted this attic room into what he actually called his chamber of horrors, and he had sort of paintings of like ghouls and demons in the room, and he also had what he called his supernatural altar, where he would literally sort of perform ancient rituals and rites to try and summon up supernatural entities. And it may not be entirely coincidence at the height of his UFO research, because he created this group in Bridgeport called the International Flying Saucer Bureau. At the height of it, he had these sort of confrontations with the Men in Black, but unlike the latter-day movie versions, where they worked for the government, in the original story, many of the original stories, and particularly Bender's story, he described how he'd be in his bedroom at night and he'd suddenly start to feel dizzy and lightheaded, and he had to lay down. And suddenly the room would be filled with like this overwhelming odor of like brimstone or sulfur. And these Men in Black would sort of shadowily manifest, kind of like the shadow people that people talk about today. And they had these sort of black suits and fedoras and these shining white eyes. And they started out as sort of shadowy and then took on full form and telepathically warned him to leave ufology or else. And this went on for a while, and Bender eventually did quit ufology. His health began to suffer, which he felt was somehow connected, that he'd been sort of almost like supernaturally infected by them. So he literally did quit ufology. He just came back a few years later to write his own book called Flying Saucers and the Three Men. And but then he quit ufology after 1962, never came back, and he actually died earlier this year at the age of 95. But what's interesting is that Bender, the family, the Bender family actually had a tradition of a creepy woman in black throughout the Bender clan, so to speak, and they all knew of her. And supposedly she would sort of appear in people's bedrooms in the middle of the night. And there was one particularly well-known story that he would tell about how a cousin of his, a young boy, kept this coin around his neck on a chain, and apparently this woman in black would turn up every night and try and steal the coin and the chain. So, it's interesting that the guy who pretty much kicked off the Men in Black mystery actually had a family tradition of a woman in black as well.
Wow, that's interesting. And this woman in black phenomena actually happened early, much earlier than the Men in Black phenomena. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I've actually got a lot of stories in the book. I think there are 2 chapters in the book that deal with 19th century reports. And they literally do describe him, even in the article title, it's like strange woman in black on the loose, that kind of thing. And in many of these cases, which I talk about some in the UK and some in the US, where people had seen these sort of very pale-faced women in black in these long flowing black cloaks, and very much acting in the same way they did in the past. They would sort of knock on people's doors out of nowhere. But what was sort of really creepy is in many of the cases, they would knock on the front doors of women who were about to give birth or who had just given birth, and they would try and steal the babies. And what's really even more creepy is that some of the English stories are almost identical to other ones I have in the book from the US and Canada. And it's almost as if, some sort of weird supernatural cult was at work on the part of these women in black to steal newborn babies, you know, around the world. So it's a very, very strange phenomenon that goes far beyond just UFOs.
Yeah, John Keel wrote about that back in '67 in The Strange Case of the Pregnant Woman. From what you had, I mean, I'm just taking from your book. So it did seem that these were possibly extraterrestrial entities that people, or that he thought it was.
Yeah, Keel was someone who sort of looked into a lot of these stories of women in black. There weren't many known back then, but John Keel did investigate some when he was looking into the Mothman situation in Point Pleasant in '66 and '67. In some cases, these women would turn up on people's doorsteps who'd seen Mothman, claim to be census takers. But when they got in the house, they would start asking all sorts of weird questions relative to paranormal phenomena and things like that. And another one of these women pretended to be John Keel's secretary and were essentially bullying people around town to tell them what they'd seen. And then they'd put a complaint in with Keel to say, you know, your secretary's kind of crossed the line. She's been bullying us. And Keel was like, well, I haven't got a secretary, you know. So... But in many of these cases, the women all looked the same. They were sort of very pale looking, long black hair, which in some cases the witnesses said looked like long black wigs. And they would hide their eyes behind these large wraparound sunglasses. And some of the witnesses said as they got close to them, they could see that their eyes behind the sunglasses looked abnormally large, as if they were trying to camouflage their sort of real appearance. And but most of the people, although the kidnapping of the babies aspect aside, most of the cases on record, and certainly nearly all the ones I've got, are tied to people who've had UFO or paranormal experiences, and mainly UFOs out of all the different ones. So.
Yeah, well, that brings me to Truman Bethlehem and Aura Rands. I mean, that was one crazy story. I mean, the fact, maybe you can go into a little bit of that. That was amazing. Yeah,
sure. Well, Truman Bethlehem was somebody who became famous in the so-called contactee era of ufology. In other words, in the early 1950s. And, you know, among the most famous of the contactees were people like George Adamski and George Van Tassel. And they typically claimed contact usually at desert locations with very human-looking aliens, and typically, they would sort of make their concerns known about atomic weapons and how we've all got to live in peace and so on. And it very much became, the contactee issue became like a movement. And, you know, you had people like Van Tassel putting on outdoor events at Giant Rock in California where literally thousands would turn up. You know, the highest gathering was like 11,000, I think, in the 1950s. You know, which is unheard of today, for a UFO conference.
Right.
But according to Truman Bethlehem, this particular experience occurred in the summer of '52 when he was working in Nevada at a place, I think you pronounce it Moapa or Moapa Valley. And he claimed to have seen a UFO come down on what's called Mormon Mesa. It's like this 2,000 foot high mesa in Nevada. And he claimed it was, you know, something like straight out of The Day the Earth Stood Still, like a large silvery white flying saucer. And Bethlehem claimed to have met the crew, which he described as, funnily enough, not like the typical space brothers or space sisters. They said they were all only about 5 feet tall, looked human, but they had some different characteristics where you would look twice at them. Now, it's a very controversial story because Bethlehem claimed that he met several of the crew members, including a beautiful alien woman named Aura Rains. And it gets into sort of like, almost like a flirty type of, human meets alien kind of situation. And, because it's such a controversial story, it sort of puts people in different camps. Those who think, wow, this is really interesting, and others think, this guy had way too much time on his time, just creating fantasies. But what's particularly interesting, and a lot of people have overlooked, is that if you read not his most well-known book, which is called A Border Flying Saucer, but some of his self-published ones, which just had very small circulations of like 100, 150 copies, in those he talked about how on several occasions he saw aura rains, not on Mormon Mesa, but actually walking through, like in Las Vegas and certain cities, which sounds very controversial, but he described her as wearing like a black outfit, black sunglasses, black beret, and she had this long black hair and looked very pale. And, nobody really back then was talking about the women in black, and yet Bethlehem was. And he was describing them exactly as how people would later describe them, like 15 years later at Point Pleasant. So, the big question is that just one big coincidence? Or, did Bethlehem actually see this sort of extraterrestrial woman who maneuvered amongst us without being noticed too much by, covering herself up with a beret and long black hair or a wig, sunglasses, and it sounds very much like what John Keel was reporting 15 years later. So for me, the Bethlehem story does have some degree of merit to it, and I think he probably actually did experience something strange. Now, some aspects of the story sound like almost he was put in like a trance-like state by the beings themselves. So possibly some of that was done to sort of create imagery in his mind that, sort of made him feel more comfortable and relaxed with entities that were more like us. So maybe in some respect his mind was sort of meddled with, but the fact that he had these MIB encounters, but with women, I actually do think, it wasn't a coincidence that he kind of preempted what came later. I think he did really see him.
Well, I think he probably did, because there were others that had seen him as well when he was in the restaurant. The guy who was with him saw it, and the waitress saw her as well. And in fact, the waitress was given a message when he tried to talk to her and refused to talk to him. And then the waitress came up and said that, that she did know who he was when she denied it earlier. It's a crazy story.
Well, it is. And what's weirder is that we get a lot of stories about women in black and men in black seen in restaurants and diners in out-of-way places. There's a lot of famous stories like that. And but you're right. That issue in the diner. Bethlehem was actually with a friend of his who he worked with, and they were on a night shift, so they went into this diner out in the Nevada desert at about 2 a.m. to get an early breakfast or a late dinner. And the woman, Black Aura Rains, was actually there with a man in black who was supposedly one of her colleagues, and she avoided talking to Bethlehem, and she was actually quite hostile. Now, what's weird, this gets even more weird, is that the man had a scar on his face, but the waitress said that when she placed the food down, she could tell it was like painted on, like it was makeup or like a line of lipstick. Now, as bizarre as it sounds, there are a lot of cases of the men in black appearing to wear makeup and lipstick to try and make themselves look more human and healthy, rather than the sort of, totally kind of anemic white collar that they usually are. So again, Bethlehem kind of preempted that aspect as well. And granted, it is a weird one, but it does tie in with some of Keel's reports where the witnesses said that the man in black looked like he'd got sort of pink makeup on, and in one case the guy sort of rubbed his cheek and it came off, and they could see underneath it was just totally white, like a sheet of paper. So it gets into really, really strange areas.
Yeah, that, and another thing that interested me about that story was it seemed that in the beginning, when he first met her, then had subsequent rendezvous, it seemed they almost had a romantic type of relationship. Then all of a sudden she denied knowing who he was. Yeah. Then he comes toward the end, he says that they started hooking up again later on.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a really odd story because in some respects, although it doesn't explicitly say so, it's not unlike the Antonio Villas-Boas story from Brazil in 57, where Villas-Boas basically claimed to have had sex with this sort of hot-looking extraterrestrial woman. Now, Bethlehem doesn't explicitly go that far, but there are a few pointers here and there where you kind of think that that's actually what he meant, but he didn't come out right and say it. Now, it is interesting that at the time, he was actually on his second marriage, and that was failing. And, you know, some people have wondered if that might have had a bearing on it, you know, if psychologically the aliens could have tapped into his mind and almost created like an imagery of this woman, so to speak, you know, and it played into his subconscious. But apparently after this, whatever the truth is, after this experience, he remained obsessed with her, Aura Raines, and he married a third time in the 60s. And what was interesting is that his wife, who he married in the 60s, her name was Elvira Roberts. And so Elvira, the first and last letter of Elvira is A&A, which is Aura, you know, A&A. And Raines begins with R and ends with S, and Roberts ends with R and S. So even to the very end, you know, even his third wife had a kind of a similar name, Aura Raines, Elvira Roberts. And so it clearly, you know, affected him partly positively and partly sort of obsessively. So it's, you know, it's a really interesting sort of case file, you know.
You think there's a possibility that his third wife was actually Aura Raines?
No, I actually don't, because if you see pictures of her, she doesn't look anything like the description of Aura Raines, because she was supposedly only like 5 feet tall, and you know, his wife was actually quite tall, like about 5'8", 5'9", I think.
Okay. You know, it kind of sounds like a Damsky. Did the Damsky ever report any type of WIB at all?
He didn't report any women in black, but he did report sort of female equivalents of the Space Brothers, yeah, sort of like women with long blonde hair, but not women in black as such, no.
The Venusians.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. You know, you mentioned, you know, I was thinking about this while I was reading your book, but you had mentioned David Jacobs' book, Walking Among Us. And when I first read that book years ago, well, it's not too long ago. It's not that old, but it's, I was thinking like you were thinking, this is crazy. But, you know, you're right. The similarities between hybrids, the WIB and the MIB is pretty startling.
Well, yeah, I mean, ironically, David Jacobs doesn't talk about the men in black or women in black in his book, but what he does talk about are issues that are very similar to both the MIB and WIB subjects. For example, he talks about how the hybrids are sent out to try and understand our customs and mannerisms. So they go into like restaurants, and you know, they're not entirely sure how to eat food properly or to drink. They have to learn, and that happens in so many Men in Black cases where, you know, people have seen the Men in Black sit down before them and they don't seem to understand how to eat food, and they always refuse drinks for the most part. And there's a famous story about how a man in black supposedly tried to drink a bowl of Jello. You know, so there's a lot of weird stuff like that. And there have been a number of cases where both the women in black and the men in black are speaking to witnesses, and they suddenly ask a sexual question out of the blue. And David Jacobs talks in the book, in his book as well, about how the hybrid don't really understand like sexual customs. You know, they'll blurt something out. So there's a lot of weird stuff like that actually does, if you know your MIB history, you know, that those things jump out of the pages of his book.
Yeah. Well, you know, you also wrote a bit about Mac Tonnies in his book Cryptoterrestrials, which I thought it was an amazing book. It had a lot of weird type of theories, and he, you know, but when it got to the when you talked about the race of underground dwellers that he wrote about, and how that may have correlated with Roswell, and it does make a bit of sense. I mean, I have thought for a long time, and I still do, that these non-human beings, these non-terrestrials, were underground based as opposed to coming from from the stars, and that these really may be us in the long run. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a controversial theory, but I mean, there are, as you said with Mac's book, he did point out some interesting stuff, and that's why, I sort of referred to him in the book. Excuse me. For example, the idea that, well, if these are extraterrestrials and they're coming from however many light years away, they seem perfectly comfortable in our atmosphere with our, the planet's gravity, with oxygen levels, which kind of sounds a little bit too coincidental, that they wouldn't have any trouble just adapting to our planet. Now, of course, if there are deep underground, hidden ancient races, well, it would possibly be to their advantage to masquerade as aliens to hide their real origins. And, of course, all their worries about nuclear war, if they're from however many light years away, why would they even bother if we destroyed ourselves? But if they're forced to share the planet with us, then it makes a great deal more sense that they would warn us subtly and perhaps sometimes more openly not to break out, with a nuclear war, because they would be affected by it as well if they're forced, to live on the planet with us. So you can make an interesting case. And, of course, the idea that the men in black and the women in black are very pale, well, you could make a case that if they're living underground all the time, barely ever seeing the sunlight, and after multiple generations, maybe they would look totally anemic, even if they actually didn't have anemia. So.
Yeah. Well, that would kind of tie in with the hybrid theory in a way. Not that I really buy into the hybrid theory. It's just not a cut and dry thing.
Need a little sunlight.
No, it's not. But it might be sort of more cut and dried if we're not talking about alien-human hybrids, but an ancient terrestrial race and Homo sapien hybrids. It's kind of like, could Cro-Magnon man mate with modern-day man? Maybe, probably they could, but there would be different types of humans. So maybe we could be dealing with a different type of human that, shares the earth with us. It's a controversial theory, but on the other hand, you could argue it's not that much more controversial than aliens, creating hybrids and dressing them up in fedoras and black wigs,
Yeah, I was interested reading what you had in there about Denise Stoner. Now, Butch is familiar with Denise because he's worked with her before, but her confrontations with these black-eyed beings, I mean, and the possible connection with the black-eyed kids, black-eyed people, and the men in black and women in black.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I actually have a couple of stories in the book where these women in black had black eyes. There's Denise's and also another friend of mine, Christina George. But Denise, certainly in the 2000s, has had a lot of weird UFO encounters, and many of them of sort of the women in black type. Probably the creepiest one was one that, actually a couple. One involved her daughter, who one day was in the house, and there was this sudden constant ringing on the front door, as if somebody was just ringing the bell endlessly. And her daughter wondered who it was, obviously. So she looked through the spy hole, and there were these two almost identical women peering through or looking towards the door, towards the spy hole itself. So her daughter went running and said, quick, come to the door. There's two strange women, the other side. So Denise did exactly that. She raced to the door, looked through the spy hole, and sure enough, there were these two sort of fairly short women dressed in black, and both of them had their hair in black bangs, and they had sort of, she described the skin as being tanned, but sort of doughy looking as well, sort of, pasty kind of looking. And they had these large, solid black eyes, very much like the eyes that we see in the images of the so-called greys, the aliens. But they had almost like an overall type thing on, like a dress, but with straps over the shoulders. Now, she didn't open the door to them at all, as most people probably wouldn't when you see these sort of creepy characters with solid black eyes. But what happened was that she actually, in the end, did decide to open the door. Now, the last time she looked in the spy hole, they were there. As she opened the door, there was no one there at all. And so that was very strange. But in a lot of these reports, both the men in black and the women in black seem to have the ability to almost impossibly vanish from the door. It's like at an impossibly fast speed. So, as bizarre as it sounds, Denise's story is actually backed up by a lot of similar ones. But she had a lot of other weird stuff come where some guy, like an odd-looking guy, turned up and claimed that he was sort of there on behalf of the city, installed a new fire alarm in the house, and again she got a weird vibe and essentially sent him packing. And she also saw a couple of these weird women in the store as well, as if somehow they sort of popped up on her radar, or she popped up on theirs for whatever reason.
Yeah. Now, most of us are familiar with the Men in Black as far as, the original incident with Moth and such in Point Pleasant. But one thing I didn't really know, I heard about it, was that the women in black are actually there as well, posing as census takers. Why is that? Is that common knowledge? Because to be quite honest with you, I'd never really heard of that before.
Oh yeah, Keel actually uncovered a number of cases of these women sort of dressing in black and posing as census takers, and they would quickly flash an ID card and find a way to get into the house, and they would start asking the typical questions: how many people live here, how many children, etc., etc. What are your hobbies? And then it got round to, have any strange things happened? Have you any paranormal activity? That kind of thing. Quite explicit questions like that. And these were typically people who'd had encounters with Mothman or other weird phenomena in and around Point Pleasant and the surrounding areas too. And Keel actually called them phantom census takers. And so, although these reports aren't sort of widely known, we actually discussed them more deeply in a lot of his private correspondence, a lot of which you can find online nowadays at johnkeel.com. So a lot of it was admittedly was talked about more in his private correspondence than it actually was in his published books. But, he was clear on the fact that there was some sort of trend going on here, and they were posing, as I said, census takers, and as I mentioned earlier, as his secretary, things like this, any way to sort of find a way into the homes of these people. And but hardly any of them, ironically, given the theme of the movies, hardly any of them ever sounded, human, really. There was always something kind of off and weird about them.
Butch or Sean, you have questions?
Well, I'm just trying to piece together if these women in black, are more supernatural, more extraterrestrial, or, what do you guys think?
Well, that's actually a good question, because it actually really is difficult to say what they are, because, I think most people's perceptions of the Men in Black, at least, come from the movies, where Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones's characters are government agents. But if you go back right to the days of Albert Bender, as I said, they all look weird. They all look really pale and odd, and they have these large eyes, and that's the same with the women as well. So, if you take Hollywood out of the picture, we're dealing with something very different. Now, the alien hybrid angle, could be a viable scenario, but you're right, there are actually a lot of weird paranormal overtones. For example, a number of people who have been using Ouija boards have reported how within like a day of using them, they've woken up in the middle of the night, sort of 2 or 3 a.m., to see this sort of fedora-wearing man in black standing over them, one of these so-called shadow people. But it's, like a shadow, but it looks like a man in black. There are other cases where, particularly with the women in black, when people have stood really close to them, within a day or so, also, they've sort of fallen sick with actually quite serious diseases and illnesses, some of which, required, emergency treatments. And with hindsight, a lot of them felt they'd almost been sort of like supernaturally infected in some way by them. I've got cases where people had the women in black in their homes, and after they left, they started to get sort of violent poltergeist activity in the home. So it is a difficult subject to kind of reconcile, because on the one hand, it seems like they're linked to nuts and bolts ufology, but on the other hand, you do have these supernatural aspects as well, which is difficult to explain how and why that could be.
Yeah, I mean, as just a layperson on some of these issues, beings, I just have a hard time, with that differentiation, wherever they are. It's kind of like the grinning man, around Point Pleasant that was seen. Was that extraterrestrial or a human, or it was just a weird being?
Yeah, I mean, the grinning man has become sort of a staple part of paranormal research today, but just through the last few years. But if you go back to the 60s, you had this creepy character around Point Pleasant named Indrid Cold, who people often described as having this. He was grinning, but it wasn't like a pleasant grin, like a serial killer grin, that kind of thing. And again, that there's just something not kind of right about these beings. There's always something strange about them that's noticeable. And again, they kind of straddle ufology, but they straddle the field of the occult, the supernatural, the paranormal as well. So, that obviously begs the question, does that mean that the entire UFO subject is sort of more supernaturally based than it is, extraterrestrial? I guess, we got a lot of questions still, but not many answers, even 50 years, after Mothman first surfaced, really, and 60-something years after Bender had his experiences.
Yeah, it's just incredibly fascinating. Like all these these beings, even the men in black themselves, quote unquote government agents that really don't come across as being quite human. I mean, a lot of these beings just share so many kind of, I guess, personality characteristics that it's hard to lump them into one category, but they're so similar in some respects.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got the men in black and the women in black. The black-eyed children are actually quite similar in the same way that they come out at night. They mainly dress in black, but black hoodies. So, whereas the men in black wear black fedoras, the women wear these long black wigs, the black-eyed children, there's also like a hat/head component with them, with the black hoodie. All three of them have the very pale skin, and in some cases, the women in black have the black eyes. And all three of them try and find ways into the house. But what's interesting is that in nearly every case of the black-eyed children, the men in black and the women in black, they almost like try and mind control the person into inviting them in. They never force their way in. Particularly with the black-eyed children, you get reports where they say, "We're lost, can we come in?" Or, "Will you let us come in?" Or, "We're homeless, can we have some food? Can you please invite us in?" And that's what the women in black and the men in black do. They stand patiently on the doorstep, and the witnesses have actually said they felt compelled almost to invite them in, which sort of parallels the old vampire legends where they have to be invited. But, so there's those three. Then we have the shadow people, which are similar because there's this one sort of subcategory of the shadow people known as the Hat Man. A friend of mine, Heidi Hollis, wrote a book called The Hat Man, all about that. And the Hat Man looks like a shadow version of a man in black, with the old style fedora. Then you've got the grinning man. And some people talk about the so-called Slender Man, which actually started off as like an internet fantasy story. And then the theory is now so many people believe in it that it's sort of almost like supernaturally come to life, but that's described as like this pale, tall, spindly character that wears a black suit, white shirt, and a skinny black tie. So, you can find a lot of surprising parallels between all of these different phenomena that in some way may be sort of all interconnected if we could understand how.
The vampire comparison was kind of neat, with the, like you said, the invitation. They need to be invited in, and that's a common theme, and it's very, I don't know, because then it adds another dimension. Or is there something more along those lines? I don't know. I'm going to bang my head against a wall in a second.
Well, actually, there's actually another vampire parallel as well. In the old legends, the vampires would, suck the blood out of people and live on blood. But in a lot of these women in black stories and men in black stories, when they're in the home of the person and the person's in almost like this dazed, mind-controlled state and, enslaved almost, they've started to feel like weak and shaky, they literally get the shakes and they feel weak and cold and clammy, and they've described it as feeling as if they were being drained of energy. So, like in the old legends, I said, the vampires drain us of blood. A lot of the witnesses to the women in black particularly felt they were being drained of like energy or drained of their life force. One described it, a guy who was diabetic described it as how he felt on a couple of times when he'd had like a diabetic crash, he'd missed lunch or dinner or whatever, and then started to, feel sick and gets the shakes and has to eat. That's how they felt in many cases, that they were losing their physical body energy or their life force. So, in that sense, there's the idea that they're sort of not blood-drinking vampires, but sort of energy-draining vampires.
I was looking at your bibliography, and I just realized that our friend Tim Beckley actually wrote a book with Truman Bethram, The People of Planet Clarion, but 1970. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think Tim did the intro or something and added some extra material. And but yeah, that's what I mentioned about Bethram. He actually did like 4 or 5 small self-published or with a small publication run other books that are far less known. His first book, Aboard a Flying Saucer, was published by a big New York company actually, but the other ones they weren't, but they're no less interested and important. A lot of them, some of them were like spiral bound ones that he put out just 50 copies, which are sort of really rare nowadays. But yeah, Tim did a good job of compiling all that material and putting it out.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting where one witness who had actually was working for the publisher of Whitley Strieber's Communion actually saw one of these women in black or one of these beings in the bookstore kind of speed reading the book.
Yeah, well, that's one of the creepiest stories in the book. It involves a guy named Bruce Lee, who was a senior employee at William Morrow, the company that's put out Whitley Strieber's 1987 book, Communion, which actually became, one of the biggest selling, most popular UFO books ever. It was a massive seller, and not just with the it actually became a New York Times bestseller. So, in that sense, it was, a very important book. Now, the story gets into sort of very weird aspects when, as I mentioned, Bruce Lee and his wife in January 1987, on what was a very sort of wintry, cold day, they went into a bookstore in Manhattan, which is now closed down. It's actually called Womrat's, or it was called Womrat's. And because they got a display of Communion in there, and Lee himself was actually an author, and they got some of his books, like most authors, he wanted to go and see if they were on display and how they were selling. And he went over to the Communion stand, and there were these sort of strange, short couple there. One was a man, one was a woman. And they had these hats on that were pulled down low, scarves, sunglasses, and, really, so to where you could barely see anything about them at all. and they were talking to each other and sort of giggling in this really sort of sinister way, saying how Strieber had got this wrong and got that wrong. And because Bruce Lee was a senior editor at the publisher of the book, you know, he said, well, what's wrong with it? You know, I actually worked on the book. And the woman actually turned to him with this sort of really menacing look, which, Bruce Lee said it looked like, the look she had on her face was kind of like a dog, you know, if you loom over a dog that doesn't know you and it's ready to sort of bite or snap at you. And, and he said she had like this sort of mad dog look on her face. And as she looked at him and he looked at her, he could see these sort of enormous, big almond eyes hidden behind the glasses. And what's really interesting is that the description of the man and the woman, you know, in black, talking to each other and being very hostile, actually almost identical to what Truman Bethlehem said about the Aura Rains and the man that he met in the diner. They almost sound like it could have been them. You know, they were short, they were camouflaged, they were hostile, didn't want to talk. But Bruce Lee's story is a really weird one. You know, these almost like dangerous entities checking out the book, and they didn't even seem human. You know, there was something inhuman about them.
Do you know of any instances where the WIB or the MIB ever get involved in any type of cryptid cases? Something other than UFO.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, you know, probably the most famous example is Mothman. You know, a lot of the Mothman witnesses were visited by MIB and Women in Black. But there are some lesser-known ones. I mean, Stan Gordon's a good friend of mine, and his book Silent Invasion talks about a number of cases where Bigfoot witnesses were visited by Men in Black. Now, in some of those cases, if you read Stan's Silent Invasion book, they actually sound more like regular military personnel who may have had some interest in the subject for whatever reason, you know, we don't know. But I've got a couple of weird cases from the UK where we have a lot of these so-called alien big cats, or ABCs as they're known, where people see these large black cats like the size of mountain lions roaming around the UK. And, you know, there shouldn't be anything like that in the UK at all. You know, the biggest cats we have in the UK are house cats, you know, pet cats. There is one called the Scottish wildcat, which is quite ferocious and give you a nasty scratch or bite, but they're really not any bigger than a normal cat. They just live wild, so, you know, they act wild. But no one could, you know, mistake one of those for something the size of a mountain lion. But people see these things, but often they're seen around like graveyards, cemeteries, old stone circles, that kind of thing, as if they have a paranormal component to them. And I've got a number of cases on record, which I talk about in the book, where people had seen these big cats, and they'd been visited by Women in Black. I think the earliest story I got in the book is from the 1950s. A woman was visited by a woman in black after seeing one of these large black cats. And I've also got a story in the book of a guy named Colin Perks, who in 2001 claimed to have been visited by this sort of actually quite beautiful woman in black. After he'd been looking into the legends surrounding King Arthur. That was his big interest, like the mythology and archaeology surrounding King Arthur. And he claimed that she warned him off his research, away from his research, for obscure reasons. And with hindsight, he came to believe she was like a definitive woman in black who was somehow linked to the phenomenon. You know, essentially warned him to stay away. And he said, although she was sort of very beautiful, she was very pale and gave off this, you know, this sort of unsettling vibe that made him want to get away from her, even though, you know, she was very attractive. So.
Interesting. Butch, you got anything?
Yeah. Nick, when did these reports on the MIBs and the women in black reports, were they pre-50s or just around the 50s?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because most of the reports did begin in the early 1950s now, and it all really began then with Albert Bender, but the controversial Maury Island case of 1947, where this fleet of UFOs was supposedly seen over the harbour at Maury Island in Washington State. One of the craft supposedly exploded and showered all this wreckage down into the harbour, some of which was reportedly collected by two men, Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman. And Chrisman, who, interestingly enough, played quite a significant role in the Kennedy assassination as well. But there was a story of a man in black, dressed in black, having reportedly threatened Harold Dahl, and that him and his family would be killed if they ever talked about it. So we do have that case. Now, we can actually take it back further. A friend of mine, Nigel Wright, who lives in England, Nigel was doing some research into old newspaper cuttings on UFOs and strange phenomena, and he found a report from 1913, I think it was, or it's around about that time, when in one of the earliest cars in the UK, this black car turned up at a docks area in England, and these three dock workers were approached by this black car, and three men in black suits got out and asked the guys if they'd seen any unusual airships flying over, and they said, well, no, and these three men in black got back in the black car and drove off. Now, there are actually some other cases as well, going back sort of 500 or 600 years, which relate to the subject of alchemy, which is this sort of allegedly magical ritual to turn what are called base metals like tin into precious metals like gold. You know, and if you understood the secrets of alchemy, you could, create endless gold, if you believe in alchemy. What's interesting is that a number of alchemists who believed they were on sort of the edge of cracking the code as how to do this, were actually visited by what they described as dark men in black. Now, they would sometimes turn up, obviously not in black cars, but they would turn up in a black horse-drawn carriage pulled by black horses, and they would turn up wearing like long black cloaks and the kind of clothes fitting for that era. They weren't threatened as much. It was more along the lines of them actually sharing information. But, there isn't actually that much difference between today's world of the men in black turning up in old-style black Cadillacs and dressed in black, and 500 years ago, it's guys dressed in black cloaks turning up in a black horse and carriage. It's as if the phenomenon has always been with us, but slightly and subtly changes to suit the perceptions of, the relevant era or whatever.
Now that's interesting.
So you can actually push the barriers back a long way, but I think it's only obviously been since the 50s that people have made an association with it being a real phenomenon rather than just sort of random events,
Yeah, well, it's just like the bipedal canines. I mean, you can trace them all the way back to Roman.
Yeah.
I mean, Rome. The stories out of Rome and Greece, and I mean, it just comes all the way through the history of the world.
Yeah, yeah. I think the trick is to note those connections, and then you realise, it's like with the women in black, you realise they're not just random cases with women who happen to be dressed in black. It's like a worldwide thing that. It's like having all the pieces of the jigsaw, like 200 pieces, but they're all scattered around the floor. And unless you put them together, you're not going to see what the jigsaw actually looks like,
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about Mac Tony's earlier. I did want to mention the woman by the name of Karen Totten and some of the weird encounters she had. Especially when she was younger. I guess she had several encounters with these WIB.
Well, yeah. I mean, Karen was somebody who I spoke to when I was writing the book, and I spoke to her and said, would it be okay to use your story in the book? And yeah, she was very helpful and friendly, and she was happy for me to use the story and also her photograph, which people can see in the book.
Right.
But she had sort of a really odd situation in the mid-1970s when she was a teenager working at a store, and she saw this woman came in essentially to buy a packet of cigarettes, but she was extremely pale and she was wearing like a thin black coat, like a kind of raincoat, that sort of thing. And the collar was turned up as high as it would go to cover her neck. And she had like long black hair, but it was clearly a wig. And also, like so many of the other women in black as well, these large black, huge actually, black sunglasses. And she had an extremely pointed chin, and her lips were almost like non-existent, and her nose was just like a line going down almost. And if you removed the wig and removed the glasses and the upturned collar and everything else, you could make a good case that she wouldn't look not unlike the so-called greys of ufology, And but one of the weird things that Karen said was that it was as if part of the experience with the woman in the store had been blanked out, and in some ways that was sort of connected to her hand. That she can't remember, there was something unusual about her hand, but it was if she'd somehow been made to forget about it, or like a screen memory had sort of blocked it out somehow.
Mm. I did want to mention before we finish tonight about your newest book, the monster book, The Creatures, Beasts, and Fiends of Nature. I tell you, that is an excellent reference. That's got a lot of stuff in there. It's really fascinating. You took a lot of mythology and kind of put a twist to it. And I mean, it's just not for cryptozoologists. It's for basically anybody that's interested in supernatural beings and the mythology of them.
My son calls it really cool.
No, that's great. That's good to know. Thanks. But yeah, that book, I do a lot of books for Visible Ink Press, and they're also the same format, where it's like 200 entries and like 150,000 words, and they're all sort of A to Z style, which I enjoy doing those. But I didn't want to just sort of do the sort of so-called usual suspects, Mothman, Bigfoot, the Yeti, Nessie. Oh. You've got to include those, obviously. But I wanted to just also point out a lot of cases that were really obscure, but also really interesting, like the Oklahoma octopus and the Bladenboro vampire, and things that most people probably haven't heard of, but would find to be really cool stories, and also tie in with some mythological creatures that may have a basis in reality. Things like the Cyclops or the Minotaur, things like that. Where they sound sort of folkloric, but could there actually be a legitimate creature that was responsible for the legend? So it sort of covers everything from flying monsters, like Mothman, and reports of surviving pterodactyls, to lake monsters, river monsters, the Chinese equivalent of Bigfoot, the Australian equivalent, and anything, the Mongolian death worm, anything that's a bit weird and monstrous, hopefully is in there. So.
Well, I tell you, it's a great point of reference for me for writing a blog, because I can see something in there that I haven't written about, and then I can go research it deeply, and it's one of the better point references I've ever had. So I really appreciate it. It's a very fascinating book.
Oh, thanks a lot.
I'm going to need to read that one.
Yeah, that's I actually got 2 of them. I sent one to Sean.
I get it back from my son.
Yeah, that's a great book. It really is.
It is cool. It's really cool.
Yeah. So, well, I think we're going to be about finished for the night. And anyway, hey, Nick, thanks for joining us again. It's great to have you on here. I know our listeners.
Thanks for having me. I've had a good time. Thanks.
Yeah, I know our listeners love having you on, and I get a lot of good response from when you come and join us. And of course, you're a writing machine, so you're going to have to look at that, and it's always a fascinating subject, whatever it is. And I, for one, really appreciate it. It does, like I said before, it does give me a point of reference for not only thinking about these things, but then digging into something further and placing it for my readers. So I do appreciate it.
Oh, cool.
So, you guys got anything else?
No, thanks for joining us, Nick. It was a lot of fun and entertaining us on some of these subjects we're not quite too knowledgeable on. But as always, you seem to expand our minds with this good stuff. So keep it coming, man. And we look forward to having you back on the program again.
Oh, thanks, and thanks for having me on the show again.
Great having you on.
All right, cool. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks
You
a
take
lot,
care
Nick.
now.
You too. See you later.
Nick Redfern, folks. Great to be joined by Nick. Good program. There, I lost my train of thought right at the beginning, Lon, when the board went wonky on me, but we're back.
Yeah, we had a bit of a lull there, but
that was a natural segue to you. Hey, Lon, you still with me?
I didn't. This woman in black. There were some pretty strange things there. I've heard references to a lot of it, but not to the way he explained it. And then he put a lot of people in there. Just like Mac Toney's. Mac Toney's wrote Cryptoterrestrials. That's a book I recommend to everybody. It is a fantastic. It's a lot of theory, like everything else we write about. But I'm telling you, he really did put a lot into that book, and it's a lot for people to think about. And I'm glad Nick referenced it in his book. It gives you a lot to think about. It really, really does, and I highly recommend it. And like always, I highly recommend Nick's books, whatever he writes. I mean, it's always interesting.
I had a lot of people ask me why we don't do a Halloween special, and I think it's because one, every week is weird enough for us that we don't have to do just one special day, and that's not really us. I think I enjoy the commercial aspect of it and the scary stories and the fun aspect of it. I think you really appreciate the traditional aspect of it, and I don't know. I don't think we need to, cheapen the holiday with a special of our own. What do you think?
Well, when we get guests like Nick Redfern around Halloween, who needs a Halloween show?
Yeah, I don't know. We used to call it Shocktober back in the day.
We did.
But we do it all the time. I mean, and that's what it is. So no, folks, unfortunately, no Halloween special from us because every week is Halloween when you're listening to Arcane Radio. I think Lon lives it every day, so I don't think he needs
I
one
do
day
live it every day. If I want to, or even if I don't want to, I've got something pulling pictures off my walls in this house now.
Oh, nice.
I was talking to Brett about it the other day, and she was kind of laughing at me. And she told me, said, "Well, you got a little girl in the stairwell." I said, "Well, no, I didn't know that, but
well, now you do.
Thanks for telling me."
But you know what, though? You did say to me in the past that you thought you felt the presence of a little girl.
Yeah, I felt something was in here. It wasn't an entity or spirit energy that I was familiar with. It had to have been from some other time before the house was built. Because I knew of everything that was, everybody who had lived here and been part of this place. But I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I've been sensing something, but when pictures start come flying off the wall, something's around.
Yeah, it is. That's you just keep that to yourself. Don't be sharing that with Butch and I now.
Well, speaking of psychic mediums, next week we have Joan Lundgren on with us, who's a psychic medium, animal communicator, healer, nurse, and an international author. So she'll be joining us next week. I hope I can join you next week. I've got surgery that same day in the afternoon. It's nothing major, but...
you're not getting the sex change this week?
No.
Oh, okay.
A little beyond that anyway, my friend.
Couldn't resist.
I think I'll be okay. So I'm just putting that out there.
Not to be confused with the former host of Good Morning America.
No, it's not Joan London.
Not Joan London. No. We just wanted to clarify that. So you never know. Hey, we have a wide audience, much wider than I ever thought.
Thanks for joining us again, and we'll be back here next week with Joan Lundgren, and hope the whole crew will be along as well. So you take it easy and have a great week.
Good night, everybody. We'll see you next week. Sean Forker, Lon Strickler, Butch Witkowski. Arcane Radio. Good night, everybody.
All right.